20 weird things people used to think were normal. Human beings have always done weird stuff. And the strangest part is, most of the time, they didn't even think it was weird. Because every era has things that feel completely normal at the time, but later make future generations look back and say, why would anyone do that? And honestly, we probably have a few of those right now. From dangerous fashion and bizarre beauty standards, to creepy social customs and terrible medical ideas, history is full of things people once accepted without blinking. So today, we're looking at 20 weird things people used to think were normal. 20. Bathing machines. There was a time when going to the beach involved bringing a small wooden house with you. These were called bathing machines. They were basically little huts on wheels that people would change inside. And then the hut would be rolled down toward the water so they could enter the sea with more privacy. Yes, people used to go swimming by being wheeled into the ocean in a box. This became especially popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, when modesty rules around public bathing were much stricter than today. So while modern beach culture is all about towels, sunglasses, and flip-flops, people back then were basically doing seaside stealth missions. And somehow, that was considered completely normal. 19. Arsenic in wallpaper. If you've ever heard the phrase deadly decor, Victorian wallpaper took that very literally. In the 19th century, bright green pigments like Scheele's green and Paris green were widely used in wallpaper, fabrics, toys, and household items, even though they contained arsenic. People loved the color so much that toxic decor became a genuine consumer hazard. So yes, there was a time when your home decor could slowly poison you, and people were still like, worth it. It matches the curtains. That is a level of commitment to aesthetics modern people can only fear. 18. Beauty products made with lead and mercury. For a long time, beauty standards were not just unrealistic, they were chemically aggressive. In different periods of European history, especially among elites, people used cosmetics containing lead and mercury to lighten the skin and create the pale look that was associated with status and beauty. These products could damage the skin and cause serious health problems over time. So yes, people were literally poisoning themselves in the name of looking elegant. And somehow the beauty industry has been doing variations of this for centuries. The packaging changes. The chaos stays. 17. Mourning jewelry made from human hair. Imagine someone handing you a bracelet and saying, "Thanks, it's made from my dead aunt's hair." Because that used to be a completely normal, sentimental gift. In the 18th and especially 19th centuries, it was common to turn a loved one's hair into mourning jewelry, brooches, lockets, rings, and even framed artwork. And while that sounds unsettling now, back then it was seen as deeply meaningful and respectful. Hair was durable, personal, and physically connected to the person who had died, which is kind of sweet. If you ignore the fact that it sounds like haunted Etsy. 16. Lobotomies as a treatment. One of the darkest examples of normal at the time was the lobotomy. In the early to mid-20th century, lobotomies were used as a psychiatric treatment for conditions ranging from severe mental illness to anxiety and depression. The idea was that altering connections in the brain could reduce emotional distress. And while that may have sounded scientific at the time, the reality was often devastating. Many patients were left with serious lifelong impairment, and the procedure eventually fell out of favor as medicine improved and ethics caught up. It's one of those historical reminders that medically accepted does not always mean good idea. And history has way too many examples of that. 15. Taxidermy in the living room. Victorian people did not mess around with home decor. And apparently at some point they collectively decided, you know what this room needs? More dead birds. Taxidermy became extremely popular in the 19th century as both decoration and scientific display. It was common in homes, museums, and collections, especially before photography and modern travel made exotic animals easier to see. Preserving specimens often involved toxic substances like arsenic to keep insects away. So yes, people were decorating their homes with preserved animals, sometimes preserved with poison, and calling it tasteful. 14. Tiny children working dangerous jobs. This one is less quirky weird and more how was this allowed? For much of the Industrial Revolution, child labor was widespread. Children worked in factories, mines, mills, and other dangerous environments because they were cheap too. Employ and often physically small enough to fit into spaces adults couldn't. At the time, many people saw this as normal, necessary, or even character building, which is a horrifying sentence. It's one of the clearest examples of how something can be socially accepted for years and still be obviously awful in hindsight. 13. People thought fresh air could be dangerous at night. For a surprisingly long time, some people believed night air was unhealthy or even dangerous. And to be fair, this belief didn't come out of nowhere. Before germ theory was understood, illness was often blamed on bad air or miasma. The idea that sickness came from foul-smelling vapors or atmospheric conditions. That led to all kinds of habits around windows, nighttime exposure, and ventilation. So yes, there was a period when people were suspicious of air, which sounds ridiculous now. But honestly, if history has taught us anything, it's that humans will confidently misunderstand almost anything for long enough. 12. Bleeding people to balance the body. For centuries, bloodletting was considered a real medical treatment. If someone was sick, weak, feverish, or basically existing incorrectly, a doctor might decide the solution was to remove some of their blood. This was based on the ancient idea of balancing the body's humors, which influenced medicine for a very long time. And while bloodletting occasionally had limited medical uses in specific cases, it was massively overused for centuries in ways that absolutely did not help most patients. So if you're ever grateful for modern medicine, just remember there was once a time when treatment often meant. Let's see if making you bleed improves this, and somehow that counted as healthcare. 11. Sending children through chimneys. Yes, this was a real job. In parts of Europe, especially in earlier centuries, very small children were used as chimney sweeps because they could physically fit into narrow chimneys and flues. It was dirty, dangerous, and incredibly harmful, but for a long time, people treated it as a normal trade. History has this awful habit of taking something clearly terrible and just letting it exist for way too long. And this is one of the most brutal examples. 10. Eating foods colored with toxic pigments. There was a time when people wanted food to look brighter, prettier, and more appealing, which sounds familiar enough. Except in some cases, historical colorants included substances we would absolutely not want anywhere near our dinner. In the 19th century, arsenic compounds were used not only in household goods but also in some colorants and consumer products because the vivid colors were fashionable and desirable. Public awareness of the danger came much later than it should have. So yes, there was an era where looks delicious and might contain poison had a deeply uncomfortable overlap. And that's not a sentence anyone should have to say about dessert. 9. Doctors prescribing cigarettes. Believe it or not, there was a period when cigarettes were marketed in ways that suggested they could be soothing, helpful, or even beneficial for certain complaints. Some old advertisements and medical culture treated smoking with a level of normalcy that feels completely surreal now, which is especially wild considering what we know today. But that's exactly what makes it such a strong example of historical blind spots. Because future generations often look back at the things people casually normalized and think, how did nobody stop and question this? And the answer is usually, some people did, just not enough of them. 8. Public executions as entertainment. This one is deeply grim, but historically very real. For centuries in many places, public executions weren't just punishments, they were events. People gathered, crowds formed. Families attended. sometimes vendors showed up, which means human beings once turned death into something dangerously close to community programming. And while modern people often like to think we're far more evolved, history has a way of reminding us that humans have always had a very uncomfortable relationship with spectacle. This wasn't fringe behavior. For long stretches of history, it was just part of public life. 7. Believing head shape revealed personality. There was once a time when people genuinely believed you could understand someone's intelligence, morality, and personality by feeling the shape of their skull. This was called phrenology, and yes, it was a real thing. In the 19th century, phrenology became wildly popular in parts of Europe and North America, despite having no valid scientific basis. It claimed bumps on the skull reflected mental traits and character, and it was used to justify all kinds of bad ideas about people. So basically, history gave us a whole era of people saying, "Interesting forehead. I don't trust him," and somehow that passed for insight. 6. Keeping death photos of loved ones. This one sounds eerie now, but it was once surprisingly common. In the 19th century, post-mortem photography became a way for families to remember loved ones who had died, especially children. And while it may seem unsettling through a modern lens, for many families, photography was expensive and rare, and this might be the only image they ever had of that person. So it wasn't meant to be creepy. It was meant to preserve memory, which actually makes it more understandable, even if it still feels like something modern people would not be emotionally prepared to find in a photo album. 5. Dangerous toys for children. If you think modern toy safety can still be a little questionable sometimes, older toys were often on another level. Historically, some children's toys were made with toxic paints, sharp metal parts, flammable materials, or chemistry sets that were much more chemistry than set. There was far less regulation, less testing, and much less awareness of long-term exposure risks. So yes, there was a time when fun for the kids and mild industrial hazard had way too much overlap. And somehow adults were like, "They'll be fine," a sentence that has aged terribly across all of history. For corsets tight enough to reshape the body. Corsets were not just fashion, they were architecture. For long stretches of history, especially in the 19th century, tightly laced corsets were associated with beauty, status, and proper femininity. And while modern pop culture sometimes exaggerates the "every woman was fainting constantly" part, it is true that extreme shaping and restrictive fashion were normalized in ways that seem pretty absurd now. People were expected to be elegant, while being gently compressed into a decorative tube. And somehow that counted as ideal. Fashion has always had a talent for making discomfort look aspirational. 3. Arsenic wafers for beauty. If poisonous wallpaper wasn't enough, some people also ate arsenic on purpose. In certain periods, arsenic was marketed in forms like beauty wafers or tonics, with claims that it could improve complexion and create a pale, delicate appearance. These beauty myths circulated even though arsenic was already known to be dangerous. So yes, there was a time when skincare included casual poisoning. And somehow people were expected to hear that and think, "Sounds promising. This is why history should never be allowed near a wellness trend." To sleeping in separate beds as the ideal marriage setup. For a long time, especially in certain upper-class households and later in 20th century design culture, separate beds for married couples were treated as practical, respectable, and even ideal. And honestly, compared to some of the other things on this list, this one might actually deserve a comeback. Because once you remove the social assumptions, it kind of makes sense. Less disturbance, more space, fewer blanket wars. So yes, history was wrong about a lot, but on this one, they may have been accidentally onto something. One thinking the present was the normal part of history. This is the weirdest one of all. Because every generation thinks their version of normal makes sense, until enough time passes. Then suddenly the fashion looks ridiculous, The habits look bizarre, the beliefs look embarrassing, and the totally reasonable trends start sounding like jokes. That's what makes history so fascinating. Not just that people in the past were weird, but that they usually had no idea they were being weird. And honestly, that should make all of us a little nervous. Because somewhere in the future, people are absolutely going to look back at our era and say, wait, they did what? So the next time modern life feels strange, just remember, history has always been weirder. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more videos like this.